Yeah, we good?
Yep, I think we're all set.
So good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. My name is Andrea Filio, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Colorado Wellness Center for Girls. We really appreciate your time tonight here with us. We are scheduled to be live here from 7 p.m. for all of you here on Mountain Standard Time till 8 p.m. Our guest speaker, who I'll introduce in a moment, has graciously offered if we run a couple of minutes after with questions and answers, that we can get that done as well, as I think there may be. So our topic tonight is digital balance and helping navigate that world, specifically as it relates to friendships and mental health. So this entire webinar will be recorded. So if you would like a copy of it, it will be sent out to you as well. It will also be posted on our website, along with our 3 other webinars from 2021. And that website is cwcgirls.com. If you would like a copy sent individually, that will be coming out to you as well. Also, there will be a question and answer session starting at about 8 o'clock. If you want to put your questions in the meantime in the chat, I'm going to have Emily here. Emily, raise your beautiful hand there. Thank you so much. She will be monitoring the chat and will help us answer those questions at the end. I am so thrilled really to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. I met Jack Bruskern maybe about 3 years ago. Our paths somehow crossed over in terms of really the mental health arena in the Denver area, in helping kiddos kind of manage and navigate through this world, and also the importance of the involvement of parents in helping their kids really in the struggle of what we know is really quite an epidemic going on in the mental health world, especially with our adolescent kids these days. So I am just thrilled to have Jack here with us. Jack is a Denver native. He grew up in the Denver area, and I'm going to brag about him for just a minute. He's currently attending Dartmouth College. So proud of that. What an amazing accomplishment. And from what I've heard, his experience there is going just great. So we are so excited to have him here with us tonight. Jack, I am going to kind of hand things over to you. I would love for you to do an introduction of the work that you have done, and to the level that you're comfortable, kind of the backstory of how you got to where you are and kind of how the path emerged along the way for you to be doing such great work.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me, Ms. Flo. Yes, I think it's a good point. The rest of the story only makes sense with the background.
Yes.
So I'll start there. Back in middle school, early middle school, I got my hands on a smartphone. It wasn't my own, but it was just a family phone around the house. And downloaded a game or two. My parents knew, kind of knew. But the thing was, I started to love these games. I started playing Clash of Clans and loved it so much. And I remember thinking so clearly, it's really fun. I'm in this clan. I have to do these things for the clan. My parents won't really understand. So I won't really try to explain it to them. I'll just play a little bit here and there. And then, just kind of behind their back, which, isn't totally a me thing to do, I think. But that's really what I started to do. And I started to play games a lot in middle school, mainly behind my parents' back. And then in high school, I got my own smartphone. So it was about 5 years ago now. And so, I guess it was maybe a little bit more obvious. I was on my phone more often, but it transitioned a little bit more to social media apps. And I was still on way more than my parents knew. And I was online all the time. freshman year in particular. Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok wasn't really a thing back then, but just scrolling and spending tons of time on there. And really just escaping. Like whenever I was having a bad day, just kind of like numbing out online a little bit, or late at night, didn't really want to do homework, didn't really have the energy, wasn't getting a lot of sleep in the first place, would just kind of numb out online because it felt fine. And I mean, I wasn't really rationalizing my way through it, but like, that's just what I did. And it came to this point sophomore year where for some reason I was driving to school and I just had this huge wake up moment. And I realized it was a very painful moment. I realized I all of a sudden saw what I was doing. And the best way I can describe it is I saw how I was just numbing out on tech, spending all this time online and not really living, not really doing the things I love to do as much as I really wanted to do them, not really spending that much time with friends, really just kind of numbing out, getting by. And that picture of myself scared me. I was like, what the heck? How did I get here? What is going on? And that started me on this journey of trying to figure out, okay, how do I balance my tech use some way? I didn't want to get away from tech totally. Tech is a great tool, but I needed to figure it out. And so that started me out trying to figure it out myself. First started by taking a break from tech. I was so freaked out by it. I knew something had to change. So I took a break from all social media and gaming and even music for a few weeks. And then after that, tried to reintroduce it, tried to figure it all out. Long story short, I had a few ideas of some ways I could help my friends with similar things because it was easier said than done. And so I started doing some research, trying to figure out, okay, how can we kids actually develop some sort of tech balance? And so I ended up giving a couple talks at some schools and loved it. That was a great opportunity to get in front of kids, and kids really resonated with the message from a kid. And so I did a lot of that before COVID. I gave a whole bunch of talks to thousands of kids at schools in Colorado and California. And then when COVID hit, I had already committed to taking a gap year, but I decided to pivot. Instead of going kids to kids, I teamed up with a team of professionals, psychologists and pediatricians to research and try to figure out, okay, how can parents guide kids toward digital balance effectively and practically? How does this actually work? How can we help parents with this? Because it's very, very important, but it's easier said than done. Tech is a great tool, but these platforms are designed to addict us to a certain extent. So how do we actually strike this balance? So I spent all of last year researching with professionals and building some resources and whatnot. And that's brought me to here.
Such an amazing story. Jack, if you could tell us the name of the organization that you started. I know we're going to touch on this at the end, but tell us a little bit about kind of how that name came up for you.
Yes. So the organization is called Screen Allies. We mainly focus on creating resources for parents. That's our big thing. But instead of just being kids trying to figure out what parents should do by like creating a perfect world in kids' eyes, or professionals just saying, okay, here's what the data says, parents figure it out, by bringing professionals, licensed professionals like psychologists and pediatricians, and our team of youth together, and interviewing kids, interviewing parents, trying to figure out what they really need, and then taking the research, taking the youth perspective, and combining that to create practical steps for parents. And we're all about like parents and kids working together to a certain extent toward balance. It's all about framing, and it's not all like butterflies and roses, but it's worth it. It's worth it in the end. And trying to help parents team up with the kids team up with their parents. That's our mission.
Awesome. Love it. What a great job. And what an amazing story. You hit on, the teaming up approach. And what I hear often at the Wellness Center is parents asking me for very specific strategies of how to get balance in their lives, in their family lives. And it really is quite a struggle, right? Because we know how important technology is for all the reasons that we know about staying connected. But I think one of the great things that we can talk about tonight, and I know we're going to hit on this in the end, is really focusing on these specific strategies and how parents can help their kids kind of navigate through without it being a constant power struggle and yelling and screaming and all of that going on, because that doesn't create a healthy environment either, and nobody, of course, wants that. So I thought that one of the first things we could talk about is kind of this role of technology in friendships, and how, you know, the technology these days is incredibly important, obviously, with connection to people's social lives, and this idea that, you know, to coordinate their lives and figure out where they're going and who's going where and when are people going to be there, there's a heavy reliance, obviously, on the phone. And so, you know, obviously there can be positive and negatives as it relates to friendships. But I was wondering if we could talk for a little bit about, you know, what does that mean in terms of teenagers' social lives almost being contingent upon using the phone, and then striking that balance in the meantime?
Totally. Yes, that's a huge area. I'd love to talk about that. I think I'll talk about it in a couple different points. First, I'd love just to shed a little bit of light on what kids think about how kids see friendships in tech. And then I want to move a little bit more into the research and some more practical things for parents. And with the youth perspective, I always say, like, the biggest thing here is to, like, just ask kids about it. Kids understand the complicated world of friendships and technology because they live it. So it's a great opportunity for parents just to ask their kids and open that conversation, get that conversation going a little bit more. So highly recommend that. But for starters, how most kids see technology socially and that working into their social lives, it's very complex. But kids see it as very, very important. Social media pages and profiles, whether it's on Instagram and having all the pictures, having all the profile, the stories, staying caught up, knowing who's doing what's going on. That's not just all happening in conversations, but, you know, from different posts or stories or whatever it is. The communication going on all the time. Used to be more text, now it's more Snapchat. That's all totally there. That's all very real. I wouldn't necessarily make the argument that kids need to have all these platforms to be included, but it's definitely very interwoven in what's going in the social scene for kids today. And kids see that as very integral, very important. That's very assumed now. But then on the other side, just taking a step back, looking a little bit more on the research, friendships, authentic friendships, the core of friendships really form only in person. The difference between being in person with friends versus being online is very different when we're talking about kids' friendships and building strong bonds and authentically. And so when thinking about friendships from a parent's perspective, highly recommend to always prioritize, always make sure that in-person time happens with kids and their friends, because that is irreplaceable. So that's always the core of friendships. And then where does technology come in? A big piece here is framing technology. Okay, friendships, the core is offline, but how can we use technology, the tools within technology for the powerful tools it offers us, for the upsides that it offers us, to contribute to these friendships without it coming at the detriment of the friendships. And this will depend a little bit on the kid, and it's important to have this conversation, hear kids' thoughts, and for you to, you know, think yourself. But technology is really good at communicating facts about, like, what's going on, coordinating plans, who's doing what, and that can be a positive. There's also a little bit of connection that can happen online, especially when, you know, maybe there's a lockdown for COVID. Yes, you know, there's a little bit of connection that does come from a FaceTime or something like that, or from a text, and that's good. But then there's also negative sides, of course. The bigger ones being competition, compare, despair on these different social media platforms. But then another big one is just online time replacing in-person time with friends. It's so much easier to just kick back on the couch and text friends or snap friends and get that little bit of connection than to make the investment of getting up and walking down the street or making plans with friends. And so that's really when it can come at the detriment of friendships, when kids aren't spending that time with their friends in person.
And so from a parent's point of view, it's really important to know that, yes, it can be helpful to connect on the phone, but also to encourage as well, supplementally, that interaction time. I mean, we know how the human brain is wired, and that we know that we're wired for attachment and connection and lubrication of discussion and ideas and touch and all of that. So it's okay to a point to allow some of that connection to happen online. But what I hear you saying is really parents encouraging their kids to do the other step, kind of one step further, of making those concrete plans on ground.
Totally. Concrete, that's where it needs to be. That needs to be where the core is. And then to have that discussion about where technology can support that without having too many downsides. I think that's the core.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as it relates to mental health, that, you know, the connection online is good, but it's not great. And that when you're struggling with something like isolation or depression or fear, that fear is really what anxiety is all about. Sometimes the connection technologically is just not enough. And so it can feed into these feelings of continued isolation and withdraw and anxiety, right?
Totally. Yes. Yeah. Yes. It's the online experience is very emotionally, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. The positives don't always outweigh the negatives. And on the mental health piece, there is a correlation. Research indicates that there is a correlation between higher amounts of screen time and mental health issues, which is really interesting. And it's not to say that all technology is evil and contributes to mental health issues, but there definitely are reasons for this correlation. And we found that there are three main reasons for it. The first being that screen time, kids spending time online, doing things instead of doing important offline activities that are important for their mental health. So screen time replacing things like hanging out with friends in person, like the friendships piece. Screen time replacing time sleeping or getting quality sleep, especially because it's so easy to get lost scrolling online late at night when we're super tired. And replacing things like working out or being outside, taking breaks, taking real brain breaks, and or having little bits of silence, so we're not constantly having inputs. And so when screen time replaces these activities, that can often be what contributes to the negative mental health. But then there's also sometimes certain screen activities do have negatives on some kids more than others too. Compare and despair is big, and fear of missing out. That's big. I talk to a lot of kids often, like, they know that the pictures being posted to Instagram or the stories from all their friends or all their contacts, that's not a perfect representation of their lives. But still, when like if I'm on Instagram scrolling for 45 minutes, going Instagram to Snapchat, seeing all the stories, and seeing perfect moment after perfect moment, and people hanging out and people hanging out and people hanging out, just one after another, that has an emotional toll that weighs on me, and a lot of other kids too. And so there's those negatives too, that kind of wear us down, mental health wise. And then one other piece I'll mention for the correlation is that on technology, it's really easy to escape. So for my freshman year, like, I'm not having a great day. Well, I don't have to face it because I can just pull my phone out and get on Instagram and scroll. It's so much easier. Does it fix things in the long run? No, but like that was the best option at that time. And sometimes it is fine to just, escape a little bit and, just watch a YouTube video and zone out for a minute. But that becomes a problem, or it became a problem for me when that became cyclical, when I was always doing that and always listening to music, never really getting breaks, and just trying to ignore all the problems in my life and all the things I didn't love. because I could just zone out, and these things just kind of built up and weren't addressed. And so those are some of the reasons why I think there's that correlation between, or why there is that correlation between mental health and worse mental health and high amounts of screen time.
Right.
But a couple of things that we recommend to parents, knowing this correlation, is to make sure that these important offline opportunity or activities do happen. So instead of necessarily first focusing on peeling back screen time and going from, whatever it is, 2 hours to 1 hour of screen time, to focus on like working towards some sort of goal that kids can at least sort of get on board with, like hanging out more with friends in person, making plans, making that happen, getting outside a little bit, taking a walk, even like walking around the block once, or getting more sleep. Sometimes kids don't love to be told to go to bed when it's 11 o'clock at night, but they can typically agree that they don't love being tired all day. And so just tapping into these things and trying to work toward some of these positives that happen to be quite important for mental health, to make sure that tech use does not get in the way of them. And then also on the mental health piece, to really open the conversation around it a little bit more. It doesn't have to be this big, crazy, scary topic. And to try to harness a culture where kids can come to their parents and talk to them and just let them know how they're doing. Maybe they're not having a great day, and to let kids say that, and for parents to first respond just by listening and empathizing, validating them emotionally, and not necessarily have the very first step be like, oh, let's fix this. Like that's immediately like, we need to change that, or, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. At least for the first step. So those are some of the important things for the mental health and tech piece.
Yeah, for sure. And even, if a kid opens up and says, hey, I'm not feeling great, for a parent, and I'm guilty of this too, to say, well, you shouldn't be on your phone so much, or this is all the phone's fault, or if it wasn't for social media, I think that prevents kids from opening up a second or a third time, because then they get afraid that their technology is going to be blamed for everything. And then they get a fear around losing that. And so for you, Jack, and you obviously only answer this question to your comfort level, but when you realized for yourself, like, hey, I'm not feeling great and I'm getting consumed with technology and it's starting to interfere with my well-being, I have two questions for you. The first one is, what did you do, that first kind of baby step or tiny step, when you realized like, hey, this isn't how I want to live my life? Can you walk us through a little bit, like a shift that you made in your mind or in your life that worked towards you finding digital balance? And then my second question is, how did your parents kind of support you in that endeavor? And were there things that they did or did not do that helped you get, work through that process?
Yes, totally. Love to touch on that. For me and my own journey, it was not really a typical one, because I was very sucked into my phone. But then I was gifted this wake up moment where I just was freaked out about my tech use and knew something had to change. And that was, I will say before that, I knew that being online wasn't the best. I knew that, this is not great. I probably shouldn't be doing this quite as much, but it was never enough. It was never enough to really want to work towards something else. It wasn't extremely strong. And then I was gifted with this wake up moment. And for me, what I ended up doing was I committed to basically be on my phone I did nothing but only text who I had to for 40 days. I just like gave up my phone, basically, didn't listen to music, and did a total fast. And then like a week into that, it hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so real. Like I needed this so much. And it was amazing. I couldn't believe it. But at the same time, I know that a lot of kids aren't necessarily gifted with that crazy wake up experience. And so I don't necessarily recommend that for everyone. But the process we've come to, though, our team of professionals and and us youth, after talking to so many kids and talking to parents, actually, well, yeah, I guess I'll just answer that second question that you mentioned before we dive into that, because that's a longer rabbit hole. I guess I brought my parents in by I ended up just recruiting them a little bit to help me out with some of the commitments I was making. For me, it was mainly me making these commitments at the time. It was, and that's not always the case. But parents can be really helpful in that respect. I'd get home and I know that if I had my phone, I would not be doing very much homework for the next few hours. And so I'd just be like, take this, like, get this temptation out of here. Like, help me. And then I'd come to them a couple hours later and ask for it back, and they, give it back or whatever it is. And then other things, like I asked if we could set up a family charging station so that when I got home, I could just put my phone there, or make different family commitments. Those were all things we did. And I kind of led the initiative on that, but parents can be super helpful in the accountability side for that piece.
Yeah.
But the parent role in kids tech use is huge. There's a huge opportunity there. And all the research we've done it all boiled down to this method for parents that I highly recommend to all parents. And it's 3 steps. The first step, it's kind of already right here. It's figuring out the process and really understanding the process and the parent's role. And I want to touch on that briefly. The ideal role for the parent, it's not to completely clamp down and try to control kids' tech use, and it's also not to go hands-free. Neither of those work very well. And in fact, there's a third option that's really, really important for parents to take. And that's what I call the strong ally role. The strong ally role has 2 main pillars. The first is to be steadfast in conviction that tech balance is very important and it's worth pursuing. And not just for kids. I mean, it's important to believe that for kids, but also for oneself, for the parents. I think often kids get the bad rap as it's, kids are the only ones with imbalanced tech use, or kids are the only ones on their online too much. But it's funny, like the first thing, we've interviewed so many kids, and the first time I bring up their parents' tech use, they're like, oh yeah, my parents are online all the time. And they tell me to get off my screen, but they're always online themselves. And so they don't really, they think there's a big disconnect between what parents are saying and what they're doing.
Yeah.
And yes, there might be a bit of disconnect there. Sometimes parents need to be working for a few minutes, or there are legitimate things. Not always, but sometimes. And so I think that's an important conversation to be had. But for parents, if parents want to say like, hey, I believe in tech balance, I believe this is important and worth pursuing, then parents need to not necessarily have perfect tech use, but need to demonstrate themselves that they want to work toward balance themselves, and maybe even recruit kids toward that end. Ask them for help in accountability or something like that. But that's one big piece, to be steadfast in conviction and really believe tech balance is important and believe in this process. And then the second piece is really a piece of the process itself, the second piece of the strong ally role. And that is to completely embrace deep communication. Deep communication, really the pillar being deep listening, really listening to kids, and asking them questions that you, the parent, are genuinely curious about their tech use or something else, and listening and learning from them and rebuilding that path of communication, rebuilding that relationship. And a lot of that comes from this really important idea that both parents and kids have strengths here. Let me rewind briefly. We were talking about the framing for tech balance. It's not like tech is good versus tech is bad. No, it's tech is a tool with all these positives that also happen to have all these traps. All these tech companies are trying to get us to spend more time online than is for our benefit. So it's an opportunity. How can we work toward using tech for the great tool it is without getting sucked in?
Right.
Okay. And then parents and kids, the strengths piece. Parents have a huge set of strengths. Parents understand what it's like to grow up without tech. Parents understand, they have this outside perspective on kids that's very important and can contribute a lot. parents also have their own tech use in their own lives. And of course, parents, are in the role of the parents. That's a very important role here. But then kids also have this other set of strengths that's very different, but also extremely important for figuring out how to work toward balance practically. Kids actually, from growing up with tech, they understand what it's like to have social media and some of the social system that works there and some of the social pressures, how that all works, some of the upsides even. They understand like the gaming world and how that interacts with being offline and some of the upsides there from actually living in it. And so kids are really the experts about the online world. And so to try to redefine this relationship around tech, a lot of it starts with understanding and acknowledging that we have these strengths, and parents can learn from kids and try to figure out, what are these upsides and how can we, outsmart these tech companies so we can use tech for these upsides that are there, and, not get sucked in too much. And so that all starts with deep communication, being upfront and honest, really deeply listening, and emotionally validating them with how they feel about different things, while still being steadfast in conviction that, in the vision that we need that tech balance is important and it's not going to be tomorrow, but like we're going to work toward it and we can do this together. So that's that step one piece. I spent a lot of time there. I guess I'll go a little bit more briefly over the next two steps, because those are actually the steps that you'll be doing, or that we highly recommend that parents do. It's the most successful way to lead kids to balance. So the second step is the first time you involve your kids. This is what we call the first conversation. And this is where parents come to their kids and they redefine this relationship around tech with them. And it usually goes something like, hey, Bobby, like the way we work, the way, we've been having a lot of arguments about this tech thing. We clearly both have strong opinions. That's not been great. I think we can both agree that that's not totally ideal. But I think tech balance is extremely important to use tech for the great tool it is without getting sucked into the traps. And I, as the parent, I believe this is super important for you. I want to help you to work there, but I also know, I feel strongly about a bunch of things, but I also know that you really understand tech well. And so I want to learn from you a little bit. And I think like we need to work toward digital balance, and it's not going to be perfect, but like, let's give this a shot. And then just like start asking them questions about like things you're genuinely curious about. Like, what do you think are the most important parts of tech? How do you think companies are most effective at like keeping kids online? Maybe not so personal, maybe not about them, or maybe about their friends, or maybe about just kids in general or younger kids. There's a lot of ways to open this conversation and build this trust, and learn from kids in a certain respect, without also like compromising what you do truly believe. That's huge too, of course. So that's step two. And that can just be one conversation. I'd also strongly recommend that conversation doesn't have to be like an hour. Often kids get, one thing kids tell us is that they hate it when their parents come and lecture them, just because it's like they just turn right off. They just turn right off. Yeah. And so being very upfront and concise, maybe say, hey, I want to talk about tech for a minute or for 5 minutes. I'll set a timer right here. When the timer goes off, if you want to keep talking, or if we want to keep talking, then we can set another time, but let's just do 5 minutes. And setting that time and being realistic and sticking to it. That's one way to break that barrier and redefine that relationship. And then, okay, so that's step two, redefine that relationship. It's often quite helpful for parents to like do that for a week or two and just focus on the communication piece. Just ask kids questions. It's very, very important here to have that vision of, okay, tech balance is possible and it's extremely important. It is. But at the same time, to try to like implement everything in a day, that's not necessarily, that very rarely works. So to have the long-term vision here. But then step three is that's when we actually start working toward balanced tech habits. That's crucial. That needs to happen. As the parent, I'd argue that is part of the parent role to help kids develop, positive habits in this area where it's difficult to develop positive habits. but only after redefining the relationship. And here's the one thing I say about working toward balanced habits. Stick with the framework of like identifying something important that kids care about, kids want, or that you both agree is important, and then figuring out how tech can support it, or how to keep tech from taking away from it. So in other words, what I often say is identifying a set of pillars being like things that the kids really care about, that they love to do. Maybe it's hanging out with their friends, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a sport, or maybe they just are annoyed that they're tired a lot and they want to have more energy. And then trying to figure out, okay, how can tech support this? How can it take away from this? And it's not always black and white, but by having this common good to work toward, that's really, really helpful in the process of working toward balance. And there's a bunch of different strategies there's a list that I think will be sent out in the chat at some point. I highly, highly, highly recommend to only start with one. Start with like one little change, one little thing that will work toward a pillar, or better help kids keep tech from detracting from their sleep, or whatever pillar it is. And to start and really just nail that pillar, set up different accountability. Maybe maybe parents have a role here, maybe the friends have a role, maybe they can do it themselves, but to set them up for success. And then just by starting with one baby step, and then maybe a month later throwing it on the calendar to revisit and to figure out what's next. One other last thing I'll mention here is that many parents, many families find it really, really helpful to set up like a bi-weekly meeting where they'll sit down for something very short, like 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes at the table. And we'll talk about, maybe the first half is where parents get to ask kids questions about their tech use, things they're genuinely curious about, or kids ask, and then the second half, kids ask parents about other things, or maybe something else. Maybe that's the time when you can have conversations and bring up things that you're not really sure is working out too well. But to have that a set amount of time, not every day, but maybe once a week, maybe once a month, and to really commit to that, that's that consistency over the long run, and not constantly being a battle and restarting. That's what will lead to these long-term results and digital balance in the long run.
Wow, that was so many good things there. I love this idea of the kind of tiny habits, think big, start small. And so when we talk about making personal commitments in starting very small, I was wondering if you could give us 2 examples of what parents can do to start really, really small. It looks like on the list for ideas of personal commitments, you have several here. So what are some that you have seen just kind of in your experience when a first baby step is taken that seems to be pretty effective and that both parties can kind of agree to?
Yeah, totally. I think one that works pretty well because it's pretty black and white is to set zones where there's no screens. So one thing is like at the dinner table. Can we commit to like not being on their phones at the dinner table together? And that being very black and white, and not just for kids, but for parents too. And maybe if there's like an insane emergency, then yes, you can get up from the table and get online for a moment, but they're not really being any exceptions. Things like that tend to work pretty well. I think phone-free zones. I think setting up a charging station can be, especially if it's right by the door or right, when kids are walking in, somewhere right there where they can pretty easily just put their phone down. And having, I think that can work pretty well because especially if kids are somewhat sensitive to not wanting to get distracted on their phone quite as much, to just have that charging station there and have that be the main base so that it's not constantly in their pockets every moment when they're doing homework or when they have, bits of downtime when they're at home. So those are some of the things that we did that worked pretty well, for other families. But it really just depends. There's so many different little strategies and little things. I just recommend starting with something that's doable, and that kids can sort of get on board with. And also, not to say that kids have to sign off on everything. Sometimes, especially when kids are a little bit younger, parents go through all the steps and they really redefine the conversation. They really ask their kids questions they're genuinely curious about and believe that they have things to learn from their kids, and really go all in. But then still might not see eye to eye on everything. In those cases, I recommend try to go for things that you can both work toward, or that they at least kind of understand why. But of course, there are also times where parents do need to lay down the law a little bit and say, okay, well, I really believe this is quite important for you. Here's why. And then, laying down the law there per se. But I hesitate to say that, just knowing that it's so often kids are actually quite receptive to these sorts of things, and parents really just need to believe that they believe in them in that respect, that they will get on board, or believe it, see it in themselves. So.
Right. And so setting those expectations and making those expectations really clear and staying consistent on it is super important. That holds true in so many things. Like sometimes parents set expectations and then out of fear or they don't want to get into conflict with the kids, all of a sudden those expectations are severed, and then there's inconsistency, and then the kid doesn't know what to expect, and then they know that they can get back on their phone if they want, because their parents don't want to get into a power struggle. And so, we see all of those things happening. Another thing that I'm wondering if you think that this may be helpful too, is kind of saying, hey, Susie, it's now 9 o'clock. You can have 20 more minutes or a half an hour more on your phone, and at 9:20 or 9:30, we're going to start working towards a disconnect here, kind of prompting them and giving them time to do whatever they want to do online and check out whatever they need to do online, knowing that it's coming. Instead of saying, hey, I need you to get off your phone right now and enough is enough and we're done for tonight. So giving kind of kids fair warning about that, I think is important. The other thing that I have seen, in the mental health community is this, the phone is the only thing that helps me with my depression, or my phone is the only thing that helps me feel connected. And then parents that have a kid that's struggling with depression or anxiety have this, oh, gee, I'm going to take away the only thing that's supposedly, working for my kid or keeping them safe, or not having them loathing in their own stuff, or whatever it may be. And so I see this a lot in the mental health community of kids saying, you're going to take away or set limits on the only thing that feels worthwhile to me or valuable to me or makes me happy.
Mm-hmm. That's really difficult. I guess I'll touch on both the things you mentioned there. So the giving warning piece, that is huge. And I'll just explain why from the kids' perspective a little bit. When kids are on social media, when kids are gaming, there's massive emotional investment there. That is huge, and a lot's on the line. There's social pressures on the line, a lot of them. And then just sometimes the games themselves, there's so much emotional investment there. It's very much tied to our identities. These companies are really good at doing that, which is it's a little frustrating sometimes. But that warning is huge, because that allows for emotional that allows for us to kind of start getting in the mindset in our heads, and okay, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute, and then just kind of being there. That's really important for kids, and trying to, and that can almost be a conversation, what's the best way, with games, kids like Fortnite, they happen in certain periods of time. It's not always easy to, get off at a certain time, but it doesn't mean that they should just keep going on forever. And so working out a good way to ideal way to stop, that's big. great conversation. The other piece about like parents trying to help their kids when they're like when technology is the only thing that they really feel like lets them be connected and whatnot. That's I guess I'll say a couple of things there. First, that's not like totally my powerhouse. I don't have really strong opinions. I will say that's not necessarily a reason to just totally let them do whatever, because we do know that, getting offline and just like even doing little things, starting with little things like taking a break and walking around the block, or going to hang out with a friend for a short while, or even talking to someone on FaceTime or on the phone versus being scrolling through Instagram or something like that. Those are measurably better for mental health. And those are quite positive. So working toward those things and doing those things there, that's worthwhile and important. So I think really just going with baby steps, I think that's important. Not trying to change everything at once. And then maybe focusing a lot on working toward these positives of, working toward whatever you want to make sure you see more of, like that you think might help their mental health, whether it's, the time with friends or whatever it is, working toward those things, the sleep, and reframing it in that way. But that's difficult. I don't have a super strong opinion about that particular situation. I just don't understand it quite well enough.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing, my intuition around that is that that each kid, what they like, what brings them joy, and what brings them happiness. And so if you can say to a kid, hey, I'm going to ask you to get off your phone at this time at 4:00 this afternoon, and we're going to go do this together. This activity that I know you like, that I know that brings you joy, that I know that you would be willing to put down your phone for, right? And so I think that if we can do something with them, instead of just saying, hey, I need you to get off your phone, and then they're sit there and they're staring at the wall, of saying, hey, I'm going to need you to get off the phone and we're going to go do this together. And we're going to go somewhere together, or we're going to do something that that kid is going to be like, hey, I really don't mind getting off my phone to do that, because that's something that I actually enjoy or that makes sense to me. And so what I think is hard is that when we ask kids to get off their phones and then disconnect, and then they just sit there and then they watch us still connected. But I still think that if we can say, hey, we're going to prompt you, and at this time you and I are going to go to do something together that I know that you enjoy and that I know that you find pleasurable. I think once we can shift them into getting up and actually getting to do that with us and incentivize them a little bit way, then getting them to disconnect doesn't become such a huge power struggle.
I just have to say that as you were saying that, I remembered a bunch of kids who are actually sort of in that situation who have told me that's huge with their parents, like their parents doing that with them. I remember this one kid I was talking to, who she'd like cook with her parents and take walks with them. And like, she loved it when they asked them things like that. And I'm sure that's not every kid, that's not going to be the thing. But when parents do that and they like show that investment and they do those things, it's much easier to do it. Or maybe with friends, maybe it's setting up an adventure with friends. But yes, I think that's spot on.
Yeah. I think it's just important for them to know that, hey, we're going to be there for them when we ask them to disconnect, and then it kind of takes their mind off the fear of missing out or not know what's going on, because now they're involved in plugged in, right, so to speak, to something else besides their phone. So I love that. And so, Jack, I would like to do a couple of things here. So we've got about 8 minutes left here. And of course, we can thank you for allowing yourself to go a little bit over as well. I would love for you to tell people a little bit more about Screen Allies and some of the recordings and some of the presentations and the information that you offer on that website if people wanted to dig a little bit deeper or really find out some more details on how to do this?
Sure, 100%. So I guess the main thing with Screen Allies, we have some blog posts up there with some different topics. But the main thing we were working on all year, the team of parent professionals and us, the team of youth in our research, was building an online resource for parents with a set of videos, and two types of videos answering parents' questions or top questions about kids' tech use, and then a set of videos that goes through the action steps of how to actually guide kids toward balance. Some of the things we mentioned here, we talked about here, but in a little bit more depth, and then some additional resources to help with that. And so that's on our website in the Get Started piece. It might be shared on the webinar here as well. So that's if you're interested, you want to dive in deeper, highly recommend that to just go a little bit deeper into the content, get those additional resources to help you with the process. So that's a resource for you there. But of course, there's also just the blog post on the website for a couple other topics if you're interested in that.
Okay, fabulous. And then was there a code that this group can use to get a discount on that?
Yes. Coupon code is CWC, just 3 letters, CWC, for a 20% discount code. So yes, for whoever, thank you for bringing that up. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, no worries. And so I want to touch on one more thing before we open it up to Q&A. In this ideas for personal commitments, you talk a little bit about actually reformatting the screen on the phone. And some ideas are, turn off notifications, or some of them. And so this reminds me of like, hey, we're not going to take away your phone. I mean, some parents may say, hey, your phone's gone at 10 o'clock at night and it's not going to be in your bedroom and it's going into another place in the house, and that's fine. But for parents that may make the decision that, hey, we're going to let our kid keep their phone on them, turning off notifications, drop down notifications, and red badges. What's that?
Yeah, totally. So reformatting my phone, that's one of my favorite recommendations, that just because it's so easy and it can have such an impact. And it's when I'm thinking about the best changes, it's the ones where there's the most gain for the least amount of cost. It's not that hard to do, and it's not going to be hard to keep doing just because it's a one-time thing. I'm very likely to be successful with it. And so, yes, a couple of the ones you mentioned on the phone, let's see, well, I'll explain the badges. So the badges are when there's an app on the home screen and it has the red dot with the 1 or the 2 with however many notifications there are. When there's a whole bunch of apps with all those notification dots, that makes the brain go berserk. That's like anxiety, whoa, like freaked out, just because it's so many inputs and so much social, all right there. So just turning them off, turning those red dots off, that makes that go away. At least as far as decreases it. And then other things, the way I've formatted my phone now is I have, so let's see, I've all my like productive apps on my home screen. Really the only apps I'm not tempted to use. And then all the other apps. So I guess that's what it looks like. And it's grayscale too, just so it's a little bit less eye candy. Yep. And then the other side, I have to put the others away, but most of them, and the ones that I'm tempted to use a lot, are in folders, and they're all in the back of the folders. And so really the quickest way to access them is to swipe down, just swipe down and search for them, type in like MES for messages. That's often what I do. But what that does is it takes a little bit more, instead of me seeing the messages icon right there and clicking it just because it's the easiest thing to do and it can get me to escape, I have to initiate that myself and think, I want to send a text, and then just swipe down and do that. It's quite quick once you get used to it. But then that helps us use it more as a tool, and have intention when doing something, instead of just having all of our favorite apps right there to just click and easily get into, prompting us all the time.
Right. And then you just don't see it right away. And like you said, your family, your brain's going crazy and you're like, oh, I got to get check this and I got to check that. If it's kind of hidden a little bit more.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So turn off Siri suggestions. How do we do that?
Yes. I have a list. Let's see. Everything on there people can Google and figure out, but I think I also have a blog post. I do have a blog post on Screen Allies that goes through each of these.
Okay.
But
Perfect.
That's pretty much the one where if you swipe down, it shows all your top apps right there. And so even if I put all my apps into the back folders, when I swipe down, I can easily just tap Instagram or whatever it is right there. I ended up getting rid of social media apps. That was the best for me. But back when I was trying to see if I could balance them or not, that's just what I do. It's like having it on the home screen. So just turning off Siri suggestions, which is just when you swipe down and the top apps show up. That's a little bit like the intention piece.
Okay. Awesome. Fabulous. Thank you so much. I want to ask another question so badly about if we should, parents ask me this question all the time,
Sure.
Should I be checking my kid's phone and should I be monitoring the apps and monitoring this and monitoring that and know their passcode and all of that stuff? And maybe that's something that's in the chat, but it is a curious question. And I don't know how to answer that question. But we'll see if that's in the chat. And then if we have a moment, we'll get back to it. But obviously that's a personal prerogative and a family decision if parents are going to have full access to their kid's phone. But it's just such a hot topic in the adolescent community of, if parents should have that full view of their kiddo's phone. So, Emily, I'm going to turn it back to you for a moment, and perhaps we can start digging through the questions in the chat.
Yes, sure thing. I just wanted to point out that I did include the PDF that Jack was referencing around kind of commitments and some of the tools that he was sharing, as well as the code and the link to the resource for Screen Allies, just so everyone's aware that that's where that's living. And it doesn't look like there were any questions yet. So if there are any questions, if you want to place them in the chat, feel free to, or if you feel comfortable coming off of mute and asking, we're definitely open to that as well. Okay, so all right, so here we go. Somebody has a question about audiobooks.
So that's me,
Great.
Kelly. Hi. Jack, this has been great. Thank you so much. And thanks, Andrea, for hosting this too. Jack, you talked about music and that you fasted even from music. And I was surprised to hear that. And I'm curious, my son listens to audiobooks a lot. And I have this, it's kind of a way for him to escape. So he's using it in this way that, sometimes I get worried about, and just wondered if you would put that in the same bucket as like gaming and social media and use these same, tools for audiobooks, because it's like reading. He has dyslexia. So like, this is the way he reads. So it's like similar to a kid carrying a book around in front of their face all the time,
Yes, totally. Thanks for bringing that up. That's a good thing to clarify. So let's see, I guess I'll throw music in here too. In general, I think audiobooks are pretty positive. They're going to have a lot of benefits. Same thing with music. I love music too. I listen to music again. I think it's one of those things where I think we could say too much of anything is too much. And I think there is an argument to be made. For me, silence is big. I need like little breaks here and there to just decompress mentally, reflect a little bit, not have constant inputs. When I do have constant inputs, that has a negative impact. And I think that's like that for many other kids too. So I think having constant inputs all the time can be negative. But in general, like out of all the, digital tools, digital platforms, audiobooks is probably one of the most positive, like reading.
Right.
So those are my thoughts there.
Thank you so much.
Oh, of course.
We had another question about the monitoring question. And just kind of, Sherry, I don't know if you have anything more to share around that. But any suggestions around sort of viewing inappropriate things, even if safety features are on, just kind of some of those boundaries or suggestions for that?
Right. Goes hand in hand with the monitoring piece.
Yes. Yeah. Let me just, yes. Okay, great. Yeah. It's a good question. I guess just monitoring first in general. Monitoring's tough. I think it's a little bit of a case-by-case basis. In general, when parents are monitoring things, it really impacts kids' trust with them. It kind of sends the signal like, I can't trust you enough. So I'm gonna have to be the watchdog on you. And so that leads kind of toward like a parent-kid animosity around tech use. So in general, when we're like trying to work toward tech balance, that's a net negative. But at the same time, at the same time, like I can kind of see how there's upsides to it, especially with kids when they're much younger. Ideally, when kids first get a phone or an iPad or something, to just set it up and have different monitors and different things set in place. And then to have it be where if kids demonstrate that they are trustworthy, then slowly parents will peel back monitoring, they'll peel back these different controls. And so kids like already having these habits will slowly strengthen them as parents peel these things back. So ideally, I think that's the best way to go. But it's difficult. I think there are some good times when monitoring is worth it. But it's important to acknowledge and to talk to kids about like why you're doing this. It's not that you don't necessarily trust them. You just want to help contribute to them working toward this positive of using tech for the tool it is without getting sucked into these more inappropriate things or negative things, these traps. There are also some like privacy controls and firewalls and whatnot that can be set up. Kids are really good at getting around stuff too. Some work better than others. I've heard pretty good things about Bark, but they're not all perfect. Tech companies have made it really hard for them to be successful. So yeah, those are my thoughts there. I wish there was like a perfect silver lining or perfect answer, but it's a little difficult.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, that, we're all going to see things and do things that perhaps aren't healthy and perhaps are maybe inappropriate at times, or someone may think is inappropriate. To me, the big thing is like, is this interfering with the well-being of the person, right? We all can dabble in things that, from time to time, and they may be slightly off, the beaten path a little bit. But if it's an age inappropriate and it's interfering with their mental health and their well-being, that's when, to me, and they're getting around safety features, and they have that much of an investment in it that they have to figure out a way to get there in spite of blocks there, that sends to me a signal that maybe, a parent needs to set up and take a little bit more control over the situation. And I like that, Jack, that, that we want to be able to trust our kids and we want them to be able to have free reign, because they're going to have to navigate the world around them anyway and figure all of this out. But when you intuitively know that something that a kid is doing is starting to deteriorate their mental health and stray them away from feeling well, I think that that's where we step in and say, you know what, this isn't working, and you're getting around these blocks of what we're trying to do. And it's our responsibility as adults to say, you know what, I just can't. I know you're going to be mad. I know you're going to be angry, but we got to talk about this. And if somebody's straying towards, pornography or inappropriate things, the big question there is, to me, is not, should we let them see it or should we not let them see it? The big question is, what's up there? Like, what is going on with this kiddo that they're finding this as a coping strategy, an escape, relief, and really digging into kind of what's driving that, and then working on monitoring it too. But asking the questions, like you said, Jack, having these open and honest conversations with kids so you can build trust and figure out, kind of what's driving the need to dig into that world. It's important. So, okay, Emily, do we have any other questions or people that have anything that they want to chat about here?
Nothing else in the chat, but if anybody has any other questions, we probably have time for one or two more. So feel free to unmute or place in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with.
While we're waiting for that to see if that pops up, Jack, I can't thank you enough for your time tonight. You are an incredible kid. You really have developed quite a model here in a very pertinent and important role for parents and guardians of trying to navigate this world for their kids. It's not going away. Technology is here to stay. They're going to get on these apps. Social media is not going to vanish from our kids' lives. So learning all these tools and helping parents support their kids is so important. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's I really appreciate the opportunity to get this out and contribute the little that I can. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks everybody for attending tonight, and happy holidays.
Thanks,
Night.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is Emily, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just, sorry, I was spacing out there for a minute because I was reading that very last question, but I'm sure she can reach out. What are your views about kids having friends that they just text with? Maybe met them on gaming servers, but
I just saw that come through.
yeah, came in kind of at the last minute there. So thank
Yeah.
you, Jack, so much.
Of course. Do we have time for that last one, or should we? Do we have to scoot?
If you have time, I think she's still on.
Okay, yeah, I can try to share my thoughts there. Let's see. Friends they just text with or meet with on gaming servers. That's difficult. I think that's not always necessarily an awful thing. I think it can be fine. There are some benefits there. There's of course some like privacy concerns and safety things when like you don't actually know a person online at all. But I think, but from everything I've learned, I do think it's quite important for kids to have some very core friendships in person, just like go-to friends in person, and to have that not be based online, just because it's a very different type of relationship. They still might call it friends. There still might be that emotional bond, but it's a different type of relationship. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily bad, but it still probably shouldn't be the core.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Ms. Fleo? Have you encountered that a fair bit?
I just think that to your point in the beginning, Jack, is that, if you know this person and that you have an established relationship with them and somehow in the gaming world, you've earned trust and connection with this person. You know, I love in-person connection. And again, from a neurological health standpoint, that's ideal, right? That's where we want our relationships, to your point, to thrive and live. But some kids love that gaming world, and that's where their identities form. And so I think that if they've met them on gaming servers and over time they've built a relationship with them, I think it's fine. But strangers and random people who are making strange requests who we're not familiar with, I think that's where maybe we especially with kids, that we're a little bit more careful.
Yeah, totally. At that point. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
So,
Awesome. It does look like there was one more if you guys are, Amy was just wondering how to start restricting phone use when it has really started to negatively impact the child.
Yes. So I recommend first, like, really going through that step number 2 and like redefining this and saying, I believe in this. It's important. And then restricting it. Restricting is a little bit difficult on the tech side because tech companies have made it really hard to actually it's hard to build apps that actually decrease their tech use. It's just the technology doesn't work very well. But like after you've had that conversation, after if you do really need to start restricting, like always lead with why, like why you believe it's important, always in that vein of like, you believe it's important for them, quite concretely, and be listening to them the whole time. The actual restriction piece, like how do you start restricting? There's some things you can do like on an iPhone with screen time, or on the Android, it's called digital well-being, and setting different limits and knowing the password, or the parent controlling that. And having that being a bit of accountability built in, where you, the parent, don't always have to be enforcing time limits and things like that. That makes it easier. So it's more likely it's actually going to happen. There's other things like a certain time at night, if at like 10 p.m. like phones go in the kitchen, in the family charging station in the kitchen, that's often a good way to do it. But I also highly recommend, like, that's not only for kids, that's for everyone in the family. Parents too, by 10 p.m. have to have their phones in the charging station. But again, I'd recommend for whenever like trying to set one of these time limiters or commitments, try to make it as easy as possible, something that will naturally happen. So sometimes the technology pieces, even though they're not always perfect in enforcing the limits exactly, sometimes there's little loopholes. They are a good example of something that will happen in the end because it's easy to enforce. It's enforced automatically. So those are a couple of ideas. There should be more ideas on the sheet. But
awesome.
also maybe recommend even asking your kid, like, what would you prefer? Like, we have a couple options here. Like, what do you think is the best fit? Like even just asking things like that, giving kids options on things so they have more the initiative of choosing something, and then it's kind of a win-win. That can be good too.
The collaboration and the partnership piece. Yeah, it's awesome. Somebody recommended Circle is a great tool to enforce time limits, focus time, and bedtime. I haven't heard of Circle, but I'm sure interested in finding out about it. So that may be helpful.
Yes, I haven't actually tried Circle myself, but I've heard some people love it. Other people, it hasn't worked so well. But yeah, some people think it's great. But like everyone has different opinions about different tech
Yes.
tech pieces. So yeah, check it out.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Perfect. Well, thank you. Emily, I don't see, it looks like we've,
I think that's
to my
everything.
knowledge, yeah, okay, awesome,
Great.
perfect.
Well, I'll go ahead and close the Zoom out. So just thank you everybody again. This will be recorded too. I know there's only a few people still on, but we'll email this out.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Jack.